Wisecrack, Flesh Jared again. Before we get into it, just a note. We didn't do a quick take last week because, well, while the Whirly Dirly Conspiracy was one of our favorite episodes of the season, we didn't really have much to add to the discussion. But we're back to take on Season 3, Episode 6, where we'll be looking at the toxic side of our favorite adventuring duo. I really love this episode for two reasons. First, they managed to address the kind of character development we crave in a way that's both satisfying and the exact opposite of what regular TV does. And second, they tap into some really interesting ideas about mental health. So fire your therapist and join me on this quick take of Rest and Ricklaxation. A quick recap. Rick and Morty need a break from almost dying all the time.
This was insane! That was pure luck! I was not in control of that situation at all!
And come to the realization that they're burned out. So they vacation at an alien spa and take a mental detoxifier for a spin. While the duo feel cleansed and rejuvenated, they leave behind the parts they hate most about themselves. Morty continues to live his life without the sense of crippling self-doubt, becomes the most popular kid in school, and even lands a date with Jessica. Meanwhile, Rick seems like a normal human being.
Excuse me.
But this new reality is interrupted as the toxic versions of themselves manage to escape and turn the whole world, weird.
As we praise our loving Father, God is alive.
We made him up for money!
One of the cleverest aspects of this episode is what I'm going to call anti-character development. As we've mentioned before, Dan Harmon is a strict adherent to his version of Joseph Campbell's The Hero's Journey. Now, the relevant part here is that many stories use protagonists confronting their shadow, a kind of dark reflection of themselves that they must overcome, like Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. In terms of character development, this overcoming usually means our hero has some new insight on life, like when a compassionate Logan sacrifices himself battling the murderous X-24, overcoming his selfishness, or when Luke Skywalker spares Darth Vader, overcoming his temptation toward the dark side. This episode uses this structure. Toxic Morty and Toxic Rick are quite literal shadow versions of themselves. But instead of overcoming their toxic personality traits, this episode is a journey to reunite with their worst selves.
Excuse me.
Healthy Morty is a smooth operator with lots of friends who ultimately needs to rediscover his self-loathing. And Healthy Rick is a thoughtful super genius who needs to rediscover his narcissism and irrational care for Morty. If anything, the regular kind of character development
Normally I would come down on any kind of disruption, but it seems to represent a positive change for your character.
is pretty creepy.
Right?
But I also think this anti-character development serves as a pretty smart commentary on mental health in our society. Rest and Ricklaxation asks, what does it mean to be mentally healthy?
Word around school is you've become super healthy.
In many ways, this episode serves as an extended parody of certain healthy attitudes promoted by self-help gurus, popular media, and the occasional life purpose cheerleader. I swear they exist in LA.
Focus on the good things, trust me. Things are good.
In particular, this idea that we must strive to eliminate any thoughts that are unpleasant or painful. Hashtag positive vibes, hashtag self-care, hashtag blessed, hashtag sorry not sorry. Now, there are a ton of intellectuals who will tell you that being mentally healthy means uncritically loving yourself, saying yes to everything, counting your blessings, and believing in yourself no matter how stupid your passive income scheme is. However, Rick and Morty shows us that these ideals, fully embodied, will make you seem like a coked out weirdo.
You know, you're so quiet. What's wrong? Well, why don't you tell me about yourself? What's the atmosphere like on planet Jessica?
I think one of the ideas the show is getting at is something sociologist William Davies has written about in his book, The Happiness Industry. For our longtime fans, we actually talked about this book in our Inside Out video. Davies writes about a concept he calls compulsory happiness, that in our modern world, there exists a kind of alliance between corporations, managers, and advertisers to promote a definition of mental health that ultimately serves the capitalist society that we live in. A kind of happiness that involves cheerfully accepting the status quo. Something touched on by Rick before.
Because I don't respect therapy. I think it's helped a lot of people get comfortable and stop panicking, which is a state of mind we value in the animals we eat.
This kind of happiness also requires constant self-improvement for the sake of being a better consumer.
Let's work off your trauma with some urban spin yoga. It's amazing. You do yoga on a bike, but you have an at-risk preteen. I don't think I can just blow this off, Morty.
We see Morty spouting platitudes that seem lifted from a Tony Robbins book.
I love drums. I never took drum lessons. Why? Limitations. We are addicted to our own own limitations. How amazing is that?
Demanding that everyone around him partake in his new lifestyle.
You have to do this detox thing I did. It's at an alien spa. You go through it. Whoosh!
And when confronted with real-life problems, like a sentient part of himself being trapped in hell, his answer is,
Trust me, things are good. Taking that away from me? That wouldn't be healthy.
The problem with this is that many of the things the self-help industry wants you to erase, like self-doubt and sadness, are pretty important. In the case of Morty, it can hold you back from becoming a full-on sociopath. And a sociopath he becomes. In a scene lifted from The Wolf of Wall Street, it looks like healthy Morty is at the top of his game as an unscrupulous stockbroker.
Heinholz Biotech, $1.5 million at 33.
With a new hot redhead to replace Jessica. Rick even compares him to another sociopathic Wall Street fat cat with too much self-esteem.
Sorry, tiny American psycho.
So what about Rick? Rick realizes some of these less desirable parts of ourselves, despite the pain they cause, are essential to actually being healthy.
Morty, do the healthy thing and voluntarily retoxify yourself.
Jessica even tells Morty,
Good to have you back.
suggesting that Morty's authentic self-hating self is truly his better self. But my only complaint with this episode is, well, it doesn't really make sense. We're meant to believe that the undesirable parts of a person are purged from their being based on their own subjective definition of toxicity.
How could that detox machine know the difference between healthy and sick for everything that goes through it? It can't. It must be by the individual's own definition of toxicity.
Yet healthy Rick says this to Morty,
I'm real proud to be your grandpa, Morty.
then later claims that his attachment to Morty is irrational, therefore toxic, and allows him to nonchalantly do this. So is his love for Morty toxic or healthy? Well, for more thoughts on that, be sure to check out The Squanch, our very own Rick and Morty podcast. We've been breaking down every episode of Rick and Morty, and people seem to like it. For those of you missing a quick take on the Whirly-Durly conspiracy, we've even got an episode on that. You can find a link in the description, or almost anywhere you get your podcasts. iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, SoundCloud, just to name a few. And don't forget to leave a review on iTunes, we might even read it on air. Thanks for watching, guys. Peace.